Chapter 1. "Oh, I just love that Maxim de Winter," Violet LaRue said, her knitting needles clicking together as if to emphasize her words. "He gives me the shivers." "Him?" Nancy Peyton asked. "He's not nearly as scary as Mrs. Danvers." Lindsey Norris glanced up from her knitting at the two ladies sitting across the circle from her. It was Crafternoon Thursday, where members of the Crafternoon Club gathered at the Briar Creek Library to do a craft. Currently, they were knitting and discussed the assigned book of the week. Lindsey was the director of the library, and this group had been one of her ideas to make the Briar Creek Library the place to be in the small town. Unfortunately, she had discovered that her ability to knit and talk at the same time was about as good as her ability to pat her head and rub her tummy at the same time, which meant it took great effort, and the results were not pretty. "Oh, that Mrs. Danvers," Violet clucked. "Someone should push her out of a window." Violet was a tall, thin black woman with warm brown eyes and gray hair that she wore pulled back from her face in a tight bun at the back of her head. She dressed in colorful, flowing caftans that whispered around her when she walked. She was a retired actress, having starred on the Broadway stage most of her life, who now volunteered her time at the Briar Creek Community Theater. She was an expert knitter, and it irked Lindsey to note that she wasn't even looking at her needles while she spoke. "I read that Mrs. Danvers is one of the most infamous female characters in literature," Nancy said, also not looking at her needles. She was Lindsey's landlord and Violet's best friend. Lindsey dumped her knitting into her lap and said, "Rebecca is Daphne du Maurier's greatest work and frequently draws comparisons to Jane Eyre." "Oh, she's getting irritated with her knitting again," Violet whispered to Nancy. "I am not," Lindsey protested. "It's all right, dear," Nancy said. "You always put on that scholarly voice when you're frustrated with your knitting." "I do not," Lindsey protested. A widow in her mid-60s, Nancy was a delightful landlady. With her short gray hair and sparkling blue eyes, she didn't miss much that went on around her. She liked to bake cookies. She was teaching Lindsey to knit, and she never nagged about the rent. But sometimes she mothered Lindsey, and at 35, Lindsey wasn't really sure how to tell her to knock it off, especially when it was kind of nice to have that maternal softness in her life. "Do not what?" a voice asked from behind her. Lindsey glanced over her shoulder to see a giant teapot standing behind her. A few months ago, she would have found this odd, but not now. "How is story time?" she asked. "Full house," Beth said. "The kids loved my Mrs. Potts outfit, and of course I taught them all to sing 'I'm a Little Teapot.'" "Naturally," Lindsey said. If Beth weren't a librarian, Lindsey was pretty sure she would have been a circus performer. She could just see her balanced on a pony, riding around the ring in a tutu with a feather on her head. Beth brought that over-the-top energy to her role as a children's librarian, and, in fact, to her whole life. Lindsey had met Beth Stanley more than 10 years before, when they both were attending Southern Connecticut State University to get their master's degree in library science. They had ended up rooming together in a small second-floor apartment on the boulevard in New Haven. It had never been dull living with Beth. Lindsey still remembered the day she had come home from class and found Beth painting a life-size mural of a rabbit warren on the living room wall. She had just read Watership Down and was inspired to get a pet bunny, which she named Blackberry after her favorite character in the book, and was decorating the living room to look like a rabbit's habitat so that Blackberry would feel more at home.